Chapter 21. Paradise. The iron orchid glided silently above the shimmering world of Aloris. The violent shuddering of the jump had completely faded, replaced by the low, steady hum of the ship's sublight engines maintaining their orbit. The red emergency lights on the flight deck had been switched off, and the cockpit was now bathed in the soft, natural sunlight reflecting off the vibrant blue and green sphere below. This system was incredibly far from the main populated areas of the galaxy. It was so far out on the fringes that it had not yet been heavily colonized. Aloris was more ocean than land, offering very little surface area to exploit for the massive corporations that ruled the core worlds. But Finn knew the grim reality of the galaxy. It would only be a matter of time before the Syndicate built more jump gates to make the route financially viable, and the quiet, peaceful, untouched planet would be irrevocably changed. James was utterly spent. His slight frame sagged in the co-pilot's chair, a dark streak of dried blood beneath his nose. The effort of tearing open a ship-sized gate across the galaxy had left him nearly empty. His eyelids drooped, waging a losing war against sleep. But he refused to surrender to sleep. Leaning forward, he pressed his hands to the console's edge, eyes fixed on the viewport. Finn, Tess, and Freya slipped quietly onto the flight deck, gathering with Amara behind the pilot's chairs. Battered and weary, they gazed out the window, and a hush of awe settled over the crew. Aloris was breathtaking. Vast, glittering oceans stretched across Aloris, broken only by sprawling emerald continents untouched by the gray blight of corporate cities or factories. White clouds drifted lazily above, and the world seemed wholly unspoiled by the relentless industry suffocating the inner systems. James gazed at the planet, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his pale, weary face. The terror of the shadows melted away, replaced by a deep, quiet awe. "It's real," James whispered, almost to himself. "I thought I made it up." "Captain," Jake interrupted softly from the pilot's seat, his eyes scanning a series of blinking yellow warnings on his tactical display. "We're going to have to land soon. That plasma blast chewed through our rear deflectors, and the starboard thruster housing is running dangerously hot. We need to set down and check the damage to the ship." Amara smiled softly at the boy, leaning against the back of his chair. "It's real, kid. You brought us right to it." She paused, crossing her arms and looking down at him. "So where do you want to land?" James blinked, pulling his gaze from the viewport to the red-haired captain. His brow knit in confusion, uncertain if she was serious. For a year, every moment had been dictated by guards and scientists. The idea of choosing for himself felt utterly foreign. "You're asking me?" James hesitated. "Well," Amara pointed out, gesturing to the rest of the crew, "no one else here knows Aloris. You know the planet. Where should we go?" James turned back to the console, his small hands hovering over the navigational screens. He scrolled the topographical map of the southern hemisphere, his eyes scanning the green and brown ridges until he found what he was looking for. He pointed with a trembling finger at a jagged, forest-cloaked mountain range beside a vast inland sea. "The Valespire Mountains," James said, his voice growing a fraction stronger with the memory. "I remember camping with my parents there, before everything. It's really beautiful. Lots of tall trees and clean rivers. There's no one nearby. It's quiet." Amara studied the map and nodded in approval. It was an ideal hiding place for a bulky, well-armed blockade runner. She turned to her pilot. "Set a course, Jake. Take us down into the Valespire Mountains." "Aye, Captain," Jake replied, his hands already flying across the yoke. "Initiating atmospheric descent sequence. Hold on, kids. We're going to ground." Finn watched the green curve of the planet rise up to meet them, a deep, heavy sigh of relief escaping his chest. They were safe. Carver and his hunter-killers were months away, chasing ghosts in the void, while the Orchid sank into the quiet, protective embrace of a forgotten world. The iron Orchid sliced through Eloris's pristine atmosphere, friction painting the viewport with soft, fiery streaks that faded into endless, brilliant blue sky. Jake guided the ship expertly through the towering peaks of the Veilspire Mountains. The landscape below was a breathtaking tapestry of dense, ancient pine forests and rushing silver rivers, completely untouched by the jagged metal and smog of the core worlds. "I have a spot," Jake murmured, banking the ship gracefully around a massive, snow-capped peak. A wide clearing right next to a river bend. The ground looked solid. "Take us down," Amara agreed, rubbing her tired eyes. The ship descended smoothly, the roar of the sublight engines scattering a flock of brilliantly colored, alien birds from the treetops. With a heavy, settling crunch against soft earth, the landing struts locked into place. Amara powered down the main systems, and the Orchid settled into a peaceful hush, broken only by the gentle hum of the life support scrubbers. She turned around to check on the kids. James had finally lost his battle with exhaustion, his head resting against the side of the co-pilot's chair, fast asleep. Down in the med bay, Doc confirmed over the comms that Ellie and Jade were also sleeping deeply, finally feeling safe enough to let their guards down. "Let them sleep," Finn said softly, unclasping his heavy tactical vest and tossing it onto a nearby crash seat. "They've earned it." Amara nodded, hitting the release for the primary airlock. "Let's go see how much of a beating we took." The crew slipped down the companionway, leaving the children to rest in the ship's quiet, gentle warmth. When the ramp lowered and the airlock hissed open, the smell hit them first. It wasn't the sharp tang of recycled oxygen, the sulfur of a black site, or the suffocating smog of Echelon. It was the scent of damp earth, crushed pine needles, and incredibly crisp, clean air. Finn stepped off the ramp, his boots sinking into the lush, green moss blanketing the clearing. He stopped, awestruck. The place was fiercely, almost defiantly beautiful. Towering ancient trees with bark like polished copper soared overhead, their branches weaving a lush green canopy. A wide crystal river sang over smooth stones nearby, while snow-capped mountains framed the valley, scraping the brilliant blue sky. After a lifetime spent shuttling between ugly industrial worlds, dead mining rocks, and cramped ship corridors, this place felt like more than just another planet. It felt like paradise itself. Amara walked down the ramp beside him, her usual sharp, commanding presence softening as she looked around the clearing. She crossed her arms, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face. Well, the kid wasn't lying. It beats the hell out of Relay 9. Raffi let out a low, rumbling laugh. He took a massive, deep breath, expanding his broad chest. "I haven't smelled air this clean since I was stationed on Arcadia. Almost makes you forget we're wanted fugitives." While Finn, Amara, and Raffi soaked in the valley's staggering beauty, the rest of the crew's attention snapped to survival. Tess, Freya, and Jake had immediately walked to the rear of the ship, their faces grim as they inspected the damage from the plasma blast. The armor plating of the Orchid's stern was heavily scorched and buckled inward, exposing a tangled mess of fused wiring and blackened thruster coils. "It's ugly," Freya muttered, crossing her arms and shaking her head. The blast chewed right through the primary deflector array. We lost the starboard stabilizer, and the secondary coolant lines are completely fused. Tess pulled a diagnostic scanner from her belt and ran it over the scorched metal. It beeped angrily. The hull integrity is compromised, but it held. Barely. If that plasma bolt had hit 3 feet higher, it would have breached the main engine manifold. We'd be floating scrap right now. Can we fix it? Jake asked, running a hand nervously through his hair. I mean, with what we have on board? Freya sighed, tapping her fingers against her chin. I can patch the coolant lines, and Tess can bypass the fried relays to get the stabilizer back online. But we can't repair the deflector array without a dry dock and raw materials. We can fly her, Jake. But if we get into another firefight before we hit a shipyard, we have 0 armor on our 6. Finn walked over, tearing his eyes away from the forest to look at the damage. How long to get her spaceworthy? A week, maybe longer, Tess estimated, looking up from her scanner. We need to fabricate some new couplings from scrap, and I want to run a full diagnostic on the jump systems to make sure the blast didn't scramble the nav computer. Take your time, Amara said, joining them at the rear of the ship. She looked back over her shoulder at the pristine, sun-dappled river. I think the kids could use a few days of fresh air anyway. Later that evening, as Eloris's brilliant blue sky faded into a deep, star-strewn indigo, the children finally stirred awake. They emerged from the medbay looking remarkably different. Doc's attention, a solid 10 hours of dreamless sleep and hot showers had chased away the sickly, exhausted pallor of the facility. Ellie, Jade, and James walked slowly up the companionway to the main airlock, all 3 eager for some fresh air and to see the world. Amara, Tess, and Freya were waiting for them at the top of the ramp. Come on, kids, Amara smiled warmly, gesturing out toward the open airlock door. We have a surprise for you. As they stepped onto the lowered ramp, the cool, impossibly fresh night air of the Valespire Mountains washed over them. But it was more than the air that made the children stop in their tracks. A few dozen yards from the ship, nestled on a patch of soft grass by the babbling river, Jake and Raffi had built a roaring bonfire. Orange flames leapt and danced, casting a warm, golden glow against the towering, copper-barked trees. And the aroma drifting from the fire was nothing short of incredible. For their entire time in the Athelgard facility, the children had survived on flavorless, chalky nutrient paste, and since escaping, they had eaten nothing but hard spacer rations and broth. But tonight, Jake was cooking real food. He'd set a heavy iron grill over the coals, filling the air with the mouth-watering scent of real meat searing above the flames. Next to it, several large, silver-scaled fish sizzled in a pan with wild herbs. Finn was sitting on a log near the fire, casually whittling a stick with his knife. He looked up and grinned as the girls led the kids down the ramp. He pointed his knife toward the river. The fish are courtesy of the local wildlife, and the meat is courtesy of my secret stash, Jake announced proudly, flipping a sizzling steak with a pair of tongs. I've been saving this stuff in the stasis cooler for a special occasion. I think escaping across the galaxy definitely qualifies. James stared at the fire, his dark eyes wide in the flickering light. He had been the one to choose this planet, but seeing it like this, safe, warm, and smelling of actual food, seemed to finally break the last of the terrible tension holding him together. He let out a breathless, disbelieving laugh, running toward the fire. Jade and Ellie followed closely behind him, settling onto the thick logs Raffi had dragged over to serve as benches. Raffi handed each child a tin mug filled with warm, sweet cider. "Drink up, kids. Doc says you need the calories. Jake, how long until that fish is done? I'm starving." "Patience, giant," Jake teased, sprinkling salt over the sizzling pans. "Perfection can't be rushed." For the next 2 hours, the clearing was filled with sounds that seemed entirely alien to the grim reality of the void. There was the crackle of burning wood, the splash of the nearby river, and the loud, joyous sound of actual laughter. They ate until they could eat no more. The fish was flaky and sweet, the steaks meltingly tender, and Jake had even baked a rough, crusty bread in the fire's embers. Ellie nestled between Finn and Amara, small hands wrapped around her mug of cider, watching the flames dance. The fear that haunted her eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet contentment. She looked up at Finn, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "Is this what it's like?" she asked softly. "Being free?" Finn smiled, reaching over to gently ruffle her dark hair. He remembered the bone pit's dusty desolation, Echelon's claustrophobic neon sprawl, and the cold, endless void. He glanced around the fire, Raffi and Jake bickering over the last piece of fish, Tess and Freya laughing, Amara watching him with a warm, steady gaze. The 3 children, at last, safe from the dark. "Yeah, Ellie," Finn murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "This is exactly what it's like." The boisterous energy settled into a comfortable, lazy calm. They sat around the dying fire, staring up at the night sky. With the ship powered down and no light pollution for thousands of miles, the sky over Aloris was a breathtaking tapestry of swirling nebulas, bright, icy planets, and millions of glittering stars. It was a completely new sky. The kids were happy and relaxed. They shared quiet stories, pointing out different constellations, while Jake and Raffi joked back and forth about past adventures. But as the flames slowly burned down to glowing red embers, the cold reality of the void began to creep back into the quiet edges of the clearing. Ellie sat between Finn and Amara, pulling her oversized flight jacket tighter around her shoulders. She stared into the fading coals, finally asking the question they had all been thinking of. "How long do we have?" Ellie asked quietly. Amara paused, lowering her tin mug. She looked down at the girl. "How long for what, kid?" "Until they find us," Ellie whispered, her dark eyes reflecting the dying firelight. "They won't just let us go. They want the machine back, and they want us." The easy, joking banter around the fire ceased immediately. The crew exchanged knowing glances in the dark. Finn leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He looked directly at Ellie, his voice steady and completely devoid of fear. "Ellie, listen to me," Finn said firmly. "Even if Athelgard knew exactly what planet we were on, even if they had our precise coordinates, it would take their fastest cruisers months to get out here, and they don't know where we are. We left no trail." He reached over, gently squeezing her shoulder. "We are safe here," Finn promised her, his dark eyes sweeping over James and Jade as well. "We can relax for a while. We have a ship to fix, and you 3 have a lot of recovering to do. Don't worry about Athelgard tonight. We will think of something." Ellie looked at him for a long moment, the fear slowly fading from her eyes as she absorbed his absolute confidence. She gave a small, genuine nod, leaning her head against Amara's arm. "Okay," Ellie murmured softly. "Now," Doc said, clapping his hands together and breaking the tension with a warm, clinical smile. "I think it's well past midnight. time for the medical officer to prescribe some sleep,